This is Ryan Finkelstein, the host of Locked On Mets. This week, I am out of town for the All-Star break, so the podcast will be audio only, available on all of your podcast feeds as well as here on YouTube. On the show today, going to talk about the series I just watched at Wrigley Field and also the big news of the weekend. Juan Soto is on the trade block and the Mets are interested.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Locked On Mets is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. On the show today, we're going to discuss a prospect that I just did not even imagine possible when this season began. Could Juan Soto be a Met this year at the trade deadline? Going to talk about that in the first segment. In the second segment, I was at that series at Wrigley Field. Going to talk about my experience with that. And then in the final segment, I want to talk about how the final inning of the game that I just watched on Sunday was a microcosm of what I believe the Mets need to do at the deadline. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. So we have to lead off the show today with the biggest story in the sport, which is the fact that Juan Soto turned down a 15-year, $440 million contract extension, which would have been the biggest contract in MLB history, which means he is as good as gone. If you're the Washington Nationals, this is almost a blessing in disguise because this is the trade that could reset your entire franchise. Let's just throw this out there. If they wanted to, the Washington Nationals could include Patrick Corbin, Steven Strasburg, and Juan Soto in a trade where the Mets eat a ridiculous amount of money and they could still ask for Francisco Alvarez. That's why you put this guy on the block. That is how valuable this guy is. But I don't want to talk about that whole aspect of it. I don't want to talk about the Strasburg or the Patrick Corbin element where the Mets could maybe lower their return by eating some money for the Nationals. The bottom line here is this is a philosophical question. We could be doing a lot of different shows about this as we kind of monitor the Mets' interest here. The Mets are absolutely interested, as pretty much any team in baseball would be, in acquiring a player of Juan Soto's talents. But really, it's a matter of, what do you believe in? Do you believe in a slower build? Do you believe in Francisco Alvarez as a prospect? Do you believe in making sure you have a farm system that can sustain itself? Or are you the big bad Mets now with Steve Cohen that are on the block, that are trying to make waves, that want to be the juggernaut that just says all in, push my chips to the center of the table every time? We got a draft right now. We're getting new prospects. Screw the ones we have. Let's get a superstar right now that can build out this lineup. And really, the bottom line here is you're talking about getting a Hall of Famer. It's that simple. You make a trade for Juan Soto, in 20 years, he's going into Cooperstown with the Mets cap on his plaque. It's that cut and dry. And because of that, that's why you entertain all of these crazy things. And you just imagine the fact that you get him for 2 years of control after this season. Now, obviously, if they make this trade, an extension, it might as well already be hammered out. Steve Cohen will do nothing to let any dollar figure stand in his way of keeping this guy in a Mets uniform for the remainder of his career. And the biggest thing is, if you make the deal now, you get him for this season. That's the thing that's crazy. We talk about maybe trading with the Nationals to get Josh Bell. Imagine you get Juan Soto. Let's just talk about the Mets lineup for a second. Brandon Nimmo, Starling Marte, Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor as your top five, with Jeff McNeil as your sixth hitter. That's maybe the best top six in all of baseball. You fill out your lineup with any combination of Eduardo Escobar, Mark Canha, whatever catcher you're going to have out there for that given day. That team is the favorite in the National League, especially when you throw in a little bit of Jacob deGrom after the break. So that is why you would go for this. And even though it's been a down year for Juan Soto, you look at his numbers, his on-base percentage is still over 400 this year. His WRC+, which again measures hitters based on a league average of 100, is 151, 51% better than your league average hitter, and he has 19 home runs. So even with all that, even though his season is not as good as it was last year, and he's struggled a little bit being the only hitter in that lineup, he still would be statistically the second best hitter on the Mets, if not the best hitter this season. That's how good he is. So that's what you're talking about here. But it really comes down to Francisco Alvarez. How much do you believe in this guy? Is he as untouchable as we thought he was? Because the reality is this trade does not happen if you don't include Alvarez. And then from there, we can talk about the different layers of the packages. And like I said, I'm going to do other shows about this, so I don't want to spend too much time today on something that may never materialize, but that is where you have to think. Do you want to go all in on this team? And that doesn't just mean giving up Alvarez. It's probably giving up Alvarez, it's probably giving up Brett Beatty, and it might even be giving up Ronnie Mauricio and or Mark Vientos plus on top of that. Now, if the Mets were to swallow a bunch of money, maybe you can get away with a 3-prospect trade or something along those lines where you don't give up much more beyond Alvarez, Beatty, and let's just say Mauricio. It's still a ton. And it's one of those trades that the Nationals have to be really careful with because they know that this is the one deal that they can't screw up because it is the make or break move that they're going to make that's going to decide the next decade of Nationals baseball. And Francisco Alvarez could be their next face of the franchise. If you're the Mets, the question is, do you gut the farm? Do you go all in? Do you trade every single prospect you have that's worth a damn to get this guy because he will make you the clear-cut favorite in the National League this year, and he will be the guy you can build around for the next 15 years, literally? It's a tough philosophical question because at the same time, as much as there's part of me that originally thought I wouldn't trade Alvarez for anybody, you just think about putting Juan Soto in that lineup in front of Pete Alonso, and it's hard not to want the Mets to go all in here. With that said, you also could make a deal that we're going to talk about in the third segment a bit, a trade I've talked about before. As I mentioned, the final inning was kind of a microcosm of what I think the Mets should do at the deadline when it comes to trading with the Cubs, and you could try to acquire Wilson Contreras, David Robertson. Your team will probably be good enough this year, and then in the offseason, you could just, for cash, just money alone, poach Aaron Judge from the Yankees. And your team, in comparison to what it would be with Juan Soto to Judge, I don't necessarily think that the team is that much different in 2023. Aaron Judge, a better defensive player by far. He would be your starting center fielder, a huge upgrade over Nimmo, even though Nimmo's been great. That's still something the Mets could do and could entertain. And then they would still have Alvarez. They would still have Beatty. They would still have Mauricio. They still have Vientos. I think that the thing, if I was the Mets GM in this spot, and I was going to make this move, what I would do is I would look at the fact that I have the top prospect in baseball, because we'll see what other lists have to say. You know, I work for Just Baseball. I'm pretty confident that Alvarez is going to be the top prospect in our midseason update, if not number 2 behind Grayson Rodriguez, a pitching prospect for the Orioles. So the top position player prospect, I'm pretty positive we're going to see that. But if that's the case, right, if you're talking about Francisco Alvarez in this deal as the trump card here, that's the piece that I'm looking at where I'm saying, you know what? If I'm making this move, if I'm doing this, I'm trying to hang on to Brett Beatty. That would be the way that I would try to approach the negotiations. Now, we'll see what type of different, machinations that can become up that Billy Epler and others can figure out here, but if I was going into these trade negotiations, I would look at Alvarez as a trump card where I'd say, hey, you want the best prospect in baseball, you got to bend a little bit, and you maybe try to hang on to a Beatty if you can. But that's where the Mets are here. This is a fascinating discussion. Like I said, we're going to spend a lot of time on this because this is not just a one-off. But I did want to open the show with it today because that is how exciting this possibility is. If you can get Juan Soto on this Mets team, watch out. But I was at Wrigley Field for 3 games. I want to talk about my experience with that. The Mets did not look great at the end of this series. Obviously, they had a great win in Game 1, and they won the series, and that's ultimately all that matters. But I want to go through some of the things I saw in just a minute. But first, whether you're ready to pop the question or if you're celebrating a milestone moment, find jewelry as unique as her with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. There you can build the engagement ring of her dreams, as Blue Nile has simple online tools to let you choose the diamond shape, size, and clarity, as well as the setting style. Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft her perfect engagement ring. Each ring is one of a kind, where you can celebrate life special moments with fine jewelry. Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Mets listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement, so use the code LOCKEDON. Again, that's code LOCKEDON. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever peace by going to BlueNile.com today. All right, so as I said on the show on Friday, I am spending All-Star Week out in Chicago. Got my sister's family out here, so we were at the games this weekend. Saw both games that a doubleheader on Saturday and also watched the game on Sunday. The Mets didn't play good baseball, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. Always love being at Wrigley Field. Great environment, good way to spend some time with the fam, but yeah, not a lot of good baseball. You know, in the first game, we saw an RBI double from Pete Alonso as the only run the Mets scored through the first 9 innings. In the 11th, they finally score on a sac fly by Pete Alonso, and they win that game. An incredible pitching by the bullpen, Adam Ottavino walking the tightrope. Just a good game to get the victory, but yeah, it was by the skin of their teeth. And then we watched in Game 2 something very similar. The Mets scored their first run, an unearned run in the 3rd inning. Some bad defense by the Cubs. We saw a lot of that this weekend. Eduardo Escobar did hit a home run in the 4th. Really the only bona fide offense I feel like I watched in the past 2 days. And then in extras, the Mets scored and Pete Alonso got hit with the bases loaded. He got hit by a pitch, obviously. And then they scored another run on an errant throw on a pickoff attempt. And you're at this point where the Mets get a couple of runs thanks to some bad play by the Cubs again. And then on Sunday, they score a run in the 1st inning when they had Lindor and Marte at the corners. Lindor gets picked off first, somehow evades the tag. It's just a terrible play by the Cubs. The Mets score a run that way. Then you have another RBI by Pete Alonso, this one on a single, but it was a pop-up that Frank Schwindel absolutely should have caught. So you really look at this game, or these games that I watched, all 3 games, 8 runs are scored, 3 of which came in extra innings as the ghost runners scored 2 of those. So you really boil it down to like 6 runs the Mets kind of earned, and the Cubs gave them over half of them. I mean, just no offense to speak of in this series. It really was kind of an indication of what the Mets need. And we're talking about a Juan Soto trade in the first segment. This offense needs something. And I think that was the biggest thing I saw. It was brutal watching these games. I mean, the final game, Drew Smith blows it late. And I was just happy he gave up 2 runs instead of 1 because I didn't want to watch extra innings. I really didn't. I was at the point where the Mets offense was so futile, and you looked up and you saw, okay, you got, Canna, Guillorme, and Mazika up, and I figured, yeah, probably JD's going to pinch hit here. So just not a lot of confidence the Mets are going to be able to score. And I was just imagining having to sit through another extra inning game where, yeah, maybe the Mets get a ghost runner to come in and maybe they win by the skin of their teeth, but not necessarily great baseball to watch. So I thought the pitching was great in this series. Taijuan Walker, 6 innings of 1-run ball. Has a 2.55 ERA on the season now. You had Scherzer go 6 1/3, gave up 2, but had 11 strikeouts. He was pretty electric, gave up a lot of hits, but the strikeouts were really impressive. David Peterson today, 5 innings, gave up 1 run. He was able to get out of a big spot with the bases loaded, did walk in a run, but other than that, was still able to work his way through that jam, and he got 8 strikeouts. The bullpen prior to Drew Smith had gone 10 2/3 without giving up a run in the 3 games I watched, and then Drew Smith gave up those 2 to blow it. So again, it was a series where the Mets pitched pretty well. They played solid defense. You give them credit for winning games. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. And luckily, The Braves against the Nationals, they lose on Sunday as well. They take the first 3 of their series. So you're at the exact same point you were when the Mets were able to have that huge series victory in Atlanta. So heading into the break, you love to see it. You love where the Mets are. An incredible first half altogether. I'm not trying to take anything away from this team. But there's problems here. There's problems with their offense, and I also think that there's clear issues with the late inning relief here. Because outside of Edwin Diaz, and at times Adam Ottavino, and even at lesser times maybe a Seth Lugo, there's not a lot that you can trust right now. And Trevor May comes back, maybe that adds another arm to the equation. But is there anybody else in that bullpen that you completely trust right now outside of Diaz? It's hard to say yes to that question, and that's where I think things stand. And I talk about the final inning and kind of a microcosm of what I believe the Mets should do at the trade deadline. You have Wilson Contreras scores the game-winning run. You have David Robertson saves the game on Sunday, and you have J.D. Davis hits into a game-ending double play. And if I had my druthers, that would be the last time I ever saw J.D. Davis taking a bat as a Met again. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about Contreras and Robertson again. We'll get to all that in just a minute. But first, BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find out the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, as BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. And also, speaking of BetOnline, home run derby tonight. Make sure you place your bet for Pete Alonso, who is going to win his 3rd derby in a row. You can book that. Him and Dave Joust. That is going to be one incredible performance. I can't wait for that. And we will, of course, be talking about Pete and talking about the derby on tomorrow's show. But I want to talk about the final inning here, because like I said, last inning, Mets versus Cubs, microcosm of what I believe the Mets should do at the deadline. To have Wilson Contreras come through with the hit and eventually come around to score the game-winning run, to have David Robertson out there saving it. I was talking about this as a trade possibility when James McCann went down 2 months ago. So anybody else who tells you that they had the Contreras-Robertson trade idea first, I got the receipts. Go back in time. This is something I've been on for a while, and I still believe this is the best move the Mets can make at the deadline, short of course, the new incredible pie-in-the-sky Juan Soto trade, which, as much as we're going to continue to talk about it, I still feel like that's a deal that just can't get done at the deadline. So much has to happen. His trade value will not alter at all if they wait until the offseason to really field offers. And I think that right now, obviously, they could try to charge even more of a premium because of it being midseason. But at the same time, I don't really think that the Nationals are going to get a haul much less in the offseason than they do right now. And if that's the case, I just find it hard to believe that some of these teams can pull off a deal like that in the middle of the season. And that leads me back to the trade we've been talking about for months now on this show with Contreras and Robertson coming in, because Contreras can catch for you when you get to the playoffs. That's going to be big. He can DH when he's not catching. That's a huge upgrade over who they have. And he rakes against left-handed pitching, unlike J.D. Davis, which leads me to where I had to close the show today after watching him again in person, because I am so done with watching this guy in a Mets uniform. And I need to say again on the front end, because I hate just ripping players, even though this is the guy that I've probably ripped per capita or per minute more on this show than anybody else. But he's a professional. Seems like he's a good guy. He's not trying to go out there and not succeed. And I think that with the change of scenery, let's just say he did get traded in the deal with the Cubs, where he's kind of a throw-in, because I think he has pretty much zero trade value other than being a throw-in, and he can go to a new team and get a change of scenery, and maybe playing in the NL Central against a lot of bad pitching. You see what Patrick Wisdom is doing with the Cubs, where not necessarily a great hitter, but he has 35 extra base hits, if I'm not mistaken. I think 18 doubles, 17 home runs. I can see J.D. Davis having a lot of success playing in the NL Central in games that don't matter. But for this Mets team, after all the scrutiny he's been under, from myself included, obviously, it just looks like a guy that's lost out there, man. And I was talking to my dad and some of my buddies this weekend, and I'll tell you, if someone put down a contract in front of me right now and they said, Ryan, if you sign this, okay, I'll promise J.D. Davis will never take in a bat in a Mets uniform again, and Mark Vientos will be up in the lineup on the first game back after the break, and I had to take $5,000 out of my savings account and give it up to make that happen for the Mets, I'm not made of money. I would do that in a heartbeat because I am so sick and tired of watching this guy. I can't stand it. Yes, he made an amazing play on a pick that helped the Mets win one of those extra innings games, and in that moment, did I maybe cheer a little bit for JD? Of course, because it was a big play. But we've seen the guy play defense for years. He has no position. So that's already something that's always bothered me. But this season, as much as anyone wants to tell me about the hard hit stuff, you can go back and listen to or watch The Curious Case of J.D. Davis, the podcast episode I did, or you can find the article I wrote about it. I pretty much cut through all of the expected metrics numbers and basically explained there that as hard as he hits the ball, the expected metrics love him, but we see in actuality he doesn't hit home runs. He hits the ball on a line drive right at outfielders. That's basically most of his productive at-bats when it comes to the expected metrics that view him better than he is. But the net result of what we're watching is a guy that never comes through in big spots, that strikes out over 30% of the time, that has no real pop when it comes to hitting home runs or driving in runs, who continues to get force feed at bats against left-handers where he has just been absolutely miserable this year. And they have a DH problem. We've been talking about it on this show all year long. And the fact that there is a prospect in Mark Vientos that's waiting in the wings, that was just in the futures game, that has not gotten a shot because this guy's blocking him, it enrages me. And so that's where I said that I would literally spend $5,000 of my own money that I don't need to be given to the Mets or to anybody because of how much I am done with watching this dude. And I know that sounds like an exaggeration. I promise you, if Steve Cohen is listening to this and he actually wants to take me up on that, first of all, it'd be incredible content for this show. So I can't lie that, I wouldn't benefit from that $5,000 spending as an investment. But I really would do it. I really would. I just can't. I'd put my money where my mouth is on this one because this is a guy that, since 2019, if you've been listening to this show, has never been a player who I've just appreciated at all. And again, it always started with the defense because those of you who listen to this show know that that's something I really care about. But just the fact that at times you'll see a J.D. Davis in the lineup at DH with Eduardo Escobar at third base and Louis Guillorme is on the bench. And I just know the value that Guillorme brings you when you're talking about his play in the field. And I'm looking today at the scoreboard as these guys are up, and because Guillorme's hitting over 290, he has a better slugging percentage than J.D. Davis anyway. A singles hitter in Guillorme. His time is so past at this point with this team. If he's taking at bats in August, something went wrong at the deadline because you got to find some way to upgrade here. Like I said, he's the perfect piece that you throw into a trade for a Contreras and a Robertson that really doesn't change the value too much. It's almost like a Med Rosario being in the trade to get Francisco Lindor. Not that Rosario, and honestly Rosario, with his athleticism, his speed, some of those things that he brings, and the fact that he still plays shortstop, he obviously had more trade value than Jay did at the time, but you weren't feeling bad about losing a Med Rosario. That's the type of throw-in piece that J.D. Davis would be at a trade. I don't think that J.D. Davis gets you a reliever. I don't think J.D. Davis can really get you anybody because I think anybody worth a damn when it comes to analytics knows the holes in this guy's game. Not to say he can't have a long career. Not to say he can't find his footing as a DH somewhere. But there needs to be a change of scenery for him, and the Mets need to move on from this guy. I think that if you're talking about which one you move at the deadline, because there's not a clear-cut backup first baseman like Dom Smith, because let's just say something were to happen to Pete, at least if nothing else, you'd have a really good defensive first baseman in Dom, who has not been great since coming back altogether if you really look at the numbers, but I still feel like when I'm watching him, he's giving more competitive at-bats than JD is. So I look at the DH spot, and obviously both of them are issues, and I think if the Mets really want to be contenders this year, neither one of them would you really want on a playoff roster considering how they performed at this point. But to me, J.D. Davis is just this issue that is still a thorn in the Mets side, and because his skill set so much mirrors what Mark Vientos could bring, the idea of a right-handed bat that could mash against lefties that are supposed to be that half of the DH platoon, that is the biggest issue for me. So we'll see if that was the last act for J.D. Davis, a game-ending double play. I doubt it because he just seems to stick around no matter what here. But to say that was frustrating as a fan who was at the game, it's an understatement. And again, when you talk about the inning as a whole, for Contreras to score that run in the bottom of the eighth, for Robertson to get the save, and for J.D. Davis to end it, it was just a perfect confluence of events that I knew I had to talk about on the show today. But that's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, all week will be audio only. And on tomorrow's show, home run derby coverage from Pete Alonso. I'll probably talk about Alonso's season as a whole as well. Dive into another all-star campaign for him. We got the all-star game on Tuesday. I'll probably do some more kind of all-star-centric coverage focusing on Jeff McNeil, who's starting the game, Starling Marte, who will be there, and Edwin Diaz. And then throughout the rest of the week, some more trade deadline stuff. And on Friday for a farm report, we will be doing MLB draft coverage as the draft is going on pretty much as I record right now. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Prospects. As I just mentioned, the draft is going on. Lindsey Crosby, your prospect encyclopedia, has you covered for everything that you may have watched on Sunday night. All of the players that were selected around the league. So make sure you make Locked On MLB Prospects your second listen, which is available wherever you get podcasts.